Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures, and today we're going to be doing another episode of our Planet Zoo Mod Spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods we've been making that show the biodiversity and the wonderful world that we live in, and some of the cool animals that inhabit it. So, yeah, I know I've been taking a break for a week, but I think these breaks really do help me get motivated and stuff like that, but obviously being busy as well. But let's get stuck into today's one. So we're going to be starting off with some fish. We've got some sharks to start off with. We're going to be starting off with the Scalloped Hammerhead by Genora Pizza, Jen, and Buffsu. So really cool little guys here. So let's have a looky-loo at these guys. There we are. So the Scalloped Hammerhead, as you can see here, are one of the species of hammerhead sharks. They're kind of they're smaller than the great and smooth hammerhead, but they're still quite large, of course. Let's see if we can get one swimming coming around here. Wonderful guy here. So these guys, this originally known as Zaniga Lenui. So these guys mean like hammer in English. And these are also known as the Southern Hammerhead or the Bronze Hammerhead, where they're found typically in tropical and temperate waters all across the globe, and down to a depth of about 500 meters. So they're typically found. They're coming onto land, but we'll see if we can find one in the water. Have a look at one of the babies while we talk about them. So these guys are found typically all across the world in pretty much warm temperate latitude and coastal waters. They're typically found down to a depth of 500 meters or about 1600 feet, and they're considered the most common of all the species of hammerhead. So in terms of their size, this is only a baby one that we're looking at because the parents obviously having a feed, but well, obviously here's an adult there, so we'll move on to the adult. So let's have a look at the camera here. So these guys typically get to about 1.5 or 1.8 meters long, or about 4'9" to 5'9", and they weigh about 29 kilograms, or 64 pounds when they reach maturity. But larger females have been known to get up to 80 kilograms, or 180 pounds, and 2.5 meters, or 8.2 feet, And the maximum length has been seen for about 4 meters or 14 feet, 152 kilograms. That's been the largest. And there's one that's weighed up to 200 kilograms, but she was gravid, so she was pregnant. So obviously a lot heavier than she'd normally be. Another thing about these guys is they have a very high metabolic rate. So that governs their behavior in kind of acquiring food. And the tertiary and the tropic levels. So they will eat lots of species kind of in the middle range, but they will be they're not really got many predators, but they can be predated by things like other sharks, whales, things like that. They're actually particularly socially intelligent as well. They tend to aggregate in groups, and that allows the species to reproduce with the fittest members and breed easier. So these guys are kind of one of the more common sharks, but still sadly critically endangered, as we'll get into. So these guys are considered a coastal pelagic species. So they typically live on continental and insular shelves in nearly deep water, and they're typically found on these, as I mentioned, the temperate and tropical waters about 500 meters deep, but they're typically about 25 meters. They're not very deep species. And the juveniles and pups often thrive in these shallow coastal waters, such as bays and mangroves, where they provide shelter from predators and high nutrients so they can get a lot of food. And then as they get older and older, they typically move out into more open waters and go and hunt their own food and join these large schools. In terms of schooling, they're often seen schooling during the night or even in the morning in big schools. They can number up to hundreds of individuals, and these large groups can obtain food easier as well. And the younger the shark typically in the school, the higher up to the surface it will be, and the adults will be found much deeper, and they're not considered dangerous or aggressive towards humans, so you're pretty safe there. So the female Scalloped Hammerhead migrates typically offshore at a smaller size of the males, between like 100 to 140 centimeters long, and they travel deeper down. And sexual maturity occurs when Scalloped Hammerhead reaches about 240 centimeters in total or longer. And physically, the mature female usually have with considerably wider uteri than their maturing counterparts. So typically the uteri is typically much larger. And the male to female ratio is kind of 1 to 1.29. So females are capable of giving birth annually, and they usually give birth in the summer. Another cool thing about these guys is that they have a homing behavior that allows them to navigate the ocean. So they can move at night and use the environment as a map, similar to a human reading a topographical map. And it seems that these can use it to guide movements as well, and also use deep water to safety and feeding. With these high metabolic rates, they're able to swim in slightly cooler waters, and they're also able to use the Earth's magnetic field to help guide themselves, so that's really cool. So in terms of their diet, they're generalists and opportunistic, so they typically eat whatever they can. They'll feed on younger sharks, younger fish as well, mackerel, herring, squid, octopus, and larger specimens have been seen to feed blacktip reef sharks as well. But they typically, youngest will tend to feed on inshore fish, and as they get larger, they'll feed on larger organisms. So pretty much whatever they get their mouths around. And in terms of reproduction, the gestation period is about 12 months, or about a year, where they produce large litters, which is most likely due to the high mortality rate in infants. And like most sharks, they do not have parental care, and nursery grounds for the species are predictable and repeatable over the years, and they're faithful to their natal sites. So where the female was born, she'll go back to give birth, and they have high infant mortality because of lack of resources. Also prevents the baby to survive. So only the fittest and the strongest grow up to maturity, and that kind of really helps their evolution as well. So that's really, really cool. And to talk about the evolution, this is very, very sad. As of 2021. The Scalloped hammerhead has been characterized as critically endangered, which is very sad. And this is because they're often harvested because of their large size and also have the high needle count. And can be actually their fins are sold for $100 to $120 per kilogram, and which there's been many conservation efforts to protect them. So a lot of them are hunted for shark fin soup, and also they're kind of easy to find because they'll return to the same birthing site, so you can basically hang out there and kill the adult sharks, which is often very not good. And it's believed in some places, especially in the Atlantic Ocean, their populations have declined over 95% over the past 30 years, which obviously very, very sucks. But there's luckily there have been calls for bans of fishing, for shark finning and things like that. But they are still considered one of the most common of the hammerheads in the world, so that's also kind of a little bit of hope. So let me just stop talking about these guys. So again, this was done by Genora, Pizza, Jen, and Buffsu. I'm just going to turn these down a bit. These are very, very loud in my ears. Audio. So let's turn the master volume down a little bit. Yep, there we are. So next we're going to be moving on to, we're going to be talking about The Blue Shark by Leaf, Buffsu, and Zero Valmont. I believe you say that. An old Zoo Tycoon modder, I remember. Really, really cool blue shark here. So these guys, also known as the Great Blue Shark, in comparison to the Great White Shark. These are from the family Caracalotidae. So these guys are kind of that same group as the Great Whites, of course. And these guys live in deep waters around the temperate and tropical areas of the world. And they often will migrate long distances, such as from New England to South America. So very, very long migration. And these guys, as you can see, they're quite long and lithe. They're very pelagic sharks that like to live in open water. And they are counter-shaded, as you can see. They've got this lighter underside and a darker top side. And these male blue sharks, they can grow out to about 1.82 to 2.82 meters, or 6 to 9 feet long at maturity. Or females will grow from 2.2 to 3.3 meters, or 7 to 10 feet at maturity, with larger specimens growing to about 3.8 meters or 12 feet. And there's been occasionally claims of one getting about 6.1 meters or 20 feet, but no shark has been recorded at that size. And typically, in terms of their weight, because they're quite slender, they're not as heavy as you think. Typically, they range from 27 to 55 kilograms, or 60 to 121 pounds in males, and to 93 to 182 kilograms, or 205 to 401 pounds in females. And occasionally, the females will reach excess of 3 meters, or well over 200 kilograms, or 450 pounds, with the largest one recorded being about 391. And they're also endothermic with a unique sense of smell. So they're able to control their body temperature a little better. So their body temperature is slightly higher than the ecosystems they live in. So that means they're able to be faster and also able to survive in slightly cooler water than you would expect. So in terms of reproduction, these guys are viviparous with a yolk sac placenta, and they can deliver between 4 to 135 pups in a litter. And the gestation period is generally about 9 to 12 months, with females being sexually mature at about 5 to 6 years of age, and males at about 4 to 5. And courtship is actually believed to involve biting of the male, and the mature specimens can be accurately sexed from the biting of the scales and things like that. So let's have a look at these little babies as we talk about reproduction. And female blue sharks have actually adapted to this mating ritual by developing skins that are actually 3 times thicker than the males. So you can tell they like it rough. I think that's the best way to put it. So have a look at these cute little baby sharks as they swim around. How cute. So let's see the adult here. So in terms of their range and habitat, they're an oceanic and epipelagic shark. So that means they live in deep, temperate, and tropical waters at a surface depth of about 350 meters, or a little over 1,000 feet. But generally, they tend to just live in that open water. They don't really dive too deep. Some areas they will inhabit greater depths. They also live as far as Norway and as south as Chile. And blue sharks have been found at the coast of every continent except Antarctica. And yeah, very wide-ranging species. Pretty much any ocean you'll find them in. As long as you're not in Antarctica or in the Arctic Ocean, I think you're good. So, yeah. In terms of feeding, the squid is typically the most important food for these blue sharks, but they will eat other invertebrates such as cuttlefish and octopus, as well as lobsters, shrimp, crabs, lots of bony fish, other small sharks, mammals, and occasionally seabirds as well. And they've actually been known to eat whale and porpoise blubber, have been recovered from their stomachs, and a lot of things like that typically will feed them. And they've actually been known to feed on tuna as well, which they've observed to take advantage of the herding behavior, as they will opportunely feed on escaping prey. So that's actually really cool. In terms of predators, younger and smaller individuals may be prey for large sharks, such as great whites and tiger sharks. And killer whales have also been known to kill these guys. And actually, northern elephant seals have actually been observed feeding on blue sharks as well. So that's also very interesting. So in terms of relationship with humans, they're considered near threatened, just mainly because they are not really hunted that much, and they're still quite common. They're edible, but it's often recommended not to eat them because they often have high levels of heavy metals such as mercury and lead in their flesh. And the skin's also used for leather, and their fins for shark fin soup. That's why they're kind of considered near threatened. You've got to be very careful. And these guys are not very dangerous. These guys have really bitten humans. From 1580 to up to 2013, there's only been 13 incidents of blue sharks biting a person, and only 4 of them were fatal. So within basically 500 years, even more than that probably, 500, 600 years, only 4 people have died from a shark. That's not even one per 100 years. So you're very, very got to be very, very, unlucky to do that. So in captivity, these guys are generally very hard to keep because most pelagic sharks are very used to big open areas, and they don't do well in a confined tank. But there have been some that have lived for almost a year, and I think the record is 224 days for 2 individuals in the Tokyo Sea Life Park. But the longest as well is they live for 800 days, but there's died due to factors such as disordered swimming due to dehydration, which also sucks. But blue sharks are also relatively easy to feed and store in captivity, and the 3 primary issues to have these guys in captivity seems to be transport, predation by larger sharks, and avoiding the smooth surfaces of the tanks. So once those issues could probably be fixed, they've been talking about that. There's been attempts to keep blue sharks in various size tanks and depths and things like that, and they've shown they have trouble avoiding walls. So people have been talking about making sure that walls are not abrasive, or keep them with long tanks that have long swim paths to keep that to a minimum. So that's also very interesting. Also, prominent rock work may actually be easier to avoid for these guys than smooth surfaces, so potentially having something that looks a bit more rocky and not smooth could be easier to keep them, which is cool because I like zoos and stuff like that. It'd be really cool to learn more about these guys in a captive setting. But yeah, let's have a look at these cute little babies. Let's have a look at the cute little baby. Have a look at him again. But yeah, really, really cool shark. I'm a big fan of the blue shark. So next, that was done by Leaf Buffsu and Zero Volmont, I believe you pronounced that. Always like water. Next, we've got some mammals now. We have got the European ground squirrel by Thomas. So let's have a look at these wonderful little guys here. So these guys, the European ground squirrel, also known as the European saltskik, I believe you pronounced that. These guys are one of the few European species of the genus. And like all squirrels, they are a rodent, and they are found from Eastern Europe and southern Ukraine, from Asian, Czech Republic, Greece, Romania, as far south as, and even found in Poland and the Carpathian Mountains, so they're quite a big range. And these guys typically get to the size of a brown rat. They're with an adult averaging about 20 to 23 centimeters, or 8 to 9 inches long, and weighing between 240 to 340 grams, or 8.5 to 12 ounces. And you can see they have this slender build with this bushy tail, and also have this yellowish grey fur that's tinted with red. And they actually have some patches of like reddish on their bodies as well when they're ready to breed, I believe. And the males are typically slightly larger than females, otherwise they look exactly the same. So these guys also have a shrill alarm call that will cause other individuals to dive for cover, and also make chirping sounds and growling sounds and things like that. And they often can be confused with the the speckled ground squirrel, which occurs in Poland, Romania, Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. But these guys typically are much more tan compared to those guys, and live in areas with coarser vegetation. Let's talk about the speckled ground squirrel, just to clarify. As I mentioned, these guys have a big range native to generally Central and Southeastern Europe, and found in those areas. There's some populations that become locally extinct in Germany and Poland, which obviously sucks, but don't worry about the car. It's just something that happens. These guys typically live in very specific habitat. They lead short turf or to dig these tunnel systems that they make, and they also like to live on steppes and pastures, things like that, also dry banks, things like that, lawns as well. And these conditions are mainly lost with a lot of agricultural things happening, so that's obviously caused their habitats to decline. So in terms of behavior, these guys are colonial animals. They typically live in large groups, and they're mainly diurnal, and they will excavate a branching system of tunnels that can be up to 2 meters deep with several entrances. And in other places in the home range, they'll dig unbranched holes where they can hide from danger as well. And if alarmed, they'll have a whistle, and then they'll kind of run straight into their holes as fast as they can. And these often have many predators, so include weasels, foxes, domestic cats, and lots of species of birds. And in terms of their diet, they typically feed on grasses, plants, crops, whatever they can get their mouths around, really. And actually, there was a study in Bulgaria that showed that they spend 11 hours of the day outside the burrow in the midsummer, but by the only autumn they'll only come out for 7 hours. And where they've been observed doing things like running around, exploring, grooming, digging, scent marking, and being vigilant and things like that. And during the winter, they will stop and enter and kind of hibernate in their nest. And each individual will have their separate chamber. And during this period, the body temperature drops to about 2 degrees, and the heart rate will kind of slow to a few beats per minute. And during hibernation, the squirrel may wake up briefly for a few days and use its fat reserves in the summer, and they'll often use most of the food that's in their body as well. And some areas they won't migrate if it's necessarily that cold, but hibernate, I mean, not migrate. Look at these little cuties. Now we're going to talk about breeding. So after emerging from hibernation in the spring, a mating would typically take place from April to May, and the gestation period for these guys is about 26 days, and with about 5 to 8 young being born and in chamber in a deep burrow. And when they're born, they're naked and blind, and their eyes will only open at about 4 weeks old. And the females feed them for about 6 weeks, and as soon as they are ready to leave the burrow. So kind of do that. And they reach maturity the following spring, and they will live for about 8 to 10 years. So in terms of their status, they are considered endangered. So this is because their population trend has been going downwards. And a lot of areas they've been more seriously affected, such as the northwestern and northern parts of their range. So a lot of their habitat has been converted to pasture and cultivation fields or for forestry, which has mean there's not enough habitat for these guys, really. But hopefully there's efforts to help protect them and try and prevent any issues like that. Sometimes even urbanization and adding roads has really halted these guys being able to move to more suitable habitat. But yeah, really, really cool little guys here. I'm a big fan. So, this is our European. So this is done by Thomas. And next we've got a remake by Leaf. We have got the Black Howler monkey. So really, really cool guy here. So we can see the males are pretty much just black here. So also known as the black and gold howler monkey, these are among the largest New World monkeys, and they can be found in areas such as Paraguay, southern Brazil, eastern Bolivia, northern Argentina, and Uruguay. So they're quite a wide range. And they get the name the black howler monkey because the males are pretty much entirely black, while the females are pretty much gold, which gives them the black and gold name. So in terms of the physical appearance, as I mentioned, they're sexually dimorphic. Males will typically get between 6 to 7.7 kilograms, with females being about half that size. The hyoid bone allows them, because they have large hyoid bones, that allows them to make deeper and louder sounds, and also in males it's larger so they can make these howls. They also have these prehensile tails, as you can see here, that allow them to climb and use it like a fifth limb. And in terms of behavior, these guys share many behaviors with other howler monkeys. So they will howl to kind of communicate with each other and stuff like that, where they'll kind of do it in dawn and use it like, hey, this is my area. But other than that, they kind of just eat and sleep. Although their diet is largely folivorous, so they typically feed on foliage, things like that, it does not prevent the digestion of things like fruits, figs, mosses, bark, seeds, and flowers. So they're pretty generous in that regard. And actually eating leaves may appear to be unfeasible for other primates, but however, they've developed that digestive system that allows them to eat leaves and digest the cellulose and things like that. So in terms of the group composition, it could be very widely dependent on the area and groups like stuff like that. But they usually have a group of a single dominant male with a bunch of adult females and babies in a smaller group. While we'll do that, we'll talk about the females and have a look at the beautiful gold colors that they have. So typically in some areas such as southern Brazil, they have groups of about 6 to 18 individuals, and some of them can also be multi-male, and the females were outnumbered and stuff like that. It just really just depends on who's there. But you're most likely to see groups of 2 to 5, 3 to 7 adult females, or 7 to 4. It just really just depends on composition. Can mess around all the time. So in terms of mating, as we can see here, let's have a look at these little guys. Oh, that's an adult. We want to have a look at the babies. Look at the babies. Very cute. So these guys seem to, according to these findings of these studies and things like that, sexual solicitation of the female occurs when the female is pursued by a particular male by grooming and stuff like that. And during fertile, non-fertile phases, the black howler monkeys will mate with many adult males and things like that. And females actually shown to conceive within a 3 to 4 day ovulatory phase. So that seems to be like that. The adult female howler, once she is pregnant, she tends to give birth within 180 to 194 days after that copulation. And the adult females will do that. And then black howlers, the promiscuity seems to be a thing that favors genetic variety and things like that. And they actually have a low rate of infanticide, which is one of the theories said to contribute to the female's promiscuity. So they don't really have issues with babies dying or other monkeys killing their babies. So it seems to be good just to do everything, which is pretty cool. So as I mentioned, their habitat, they're typically found in Central South America, such as Paraguay, Brazil, Eastern Bolivia, places like that. Very, very wide-ranging monkeys. And like other animals living in the Amazon, they're considered near-threatened. This is mainly because of population declines, because of habitat degradation, pressures from hunting, and vulnerability to disease outbreaks. So diseases that could potentially stem from, like yellow fever is a good example, that could really hurt their populations. But also, obviously, hunting and the illegal pet trade has also really hurt these guys in some places. And even there was a 2020 study that showed in Uruguay, the attitudes of humans towards urban howler monkeys seem these guys really actively seek participants' questionnaires regarding the hunting. And then they found that 93% of the participants knew it was illegal to kill the monkeys, but more than half of them didn't even know that you couldn't keep them as pets. So it's kind of really, really weird about that. But yeah, and they're starting to try and adapt to these urban environments, but generally they often get attacked by domestic dogs, things like that, but still really, really wonderful monkeys, and they're still doing okay. They're considered near-threatened. They've got a very wide range, but yeah, obviously got to be very careful of that. Though now, that was done by Leaf. Now we've got one by Howler. We're going back into the Ice Age, into North America. We're talking about a really, really cool animal. So we've got the Stag-moose. We'll have a look at the female. The Stag-moose, or Salivarius scotti, these guys are a very large species of deer. They're kind of related to moose, loosely. They lived in North America during the Pleistocene, and kind of that American version of the moose at the time. And they have antlers that look more complex than the moose. We'll have a look at that. And they have a nozzle or a muzzle that looks much more similar to that of a typical deer. So there's a little bit of changes in that. So these guys were as large as a moose, but they had a much more elk-like head with these long legs and more complex antlers. And a male, or a large male, typically reached about 2.5 meters or 8 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed about 7 to 8 kilograms, or about 1,500 pounds. And these guys resided in North America, where they typically lived things like the woolly mammoths, Columbian mammoths, ground sloths, giant and longhorn bison, saber-toothed cats, things like that. And they kind of went extinct with these guys at the end of the last ice age, so about 11,000 years ago. And the first evidence of these guys was discovered in Kentucky, and the most complete specimen was found in 1885 in New Jersey, with mummified specimens also being found. And the most complete skull ever discovered was dredged from a pond in Indiana that dated to about 13,500 years ago. So it's very long-lived. So in terms of evolution, we'll talk about that. They're believed to be evolved from a Eurasian counterpart. So these guys are believed to be related to the Cervellus latifrons, which is kind of the Eurasian version of this guy. And these seem to be similar species around the time and place. And where they shared these parklands with lots of other the Pleistocene megafauna, such as caribou, moose, the woodland muskox, and giant beavers as well, when moose were there. And they kind of ranged from southern Canada to Arkansas into New Jersey as well. And as the glaciers retreated, moose, which had come from the Bering Land Bridge, would have potentially moved down and kind of taken some of the habitat and populated the habitats of these guys. It may have actually caused them to become extinct to some extent because of competition with moose. Let's have a look at the male while we talk about them. Look at these wonderful antlers they've got. Really interesting. And although there's no paleontological evidence that they were associated much with humans, other evidence to their extinction believes to be some of the issues that went with climate change, potentially diseases spread from moose and other animals coming from the Bering Land Bridge. Human hunting, even though there's no evidence for it, could be very possible. General climate change as the world was getting warmer at the time. Lots of issues could have really hurt these guys, along with other species of the megafauna at the end of the Ice Age. So it seems that these guys also lived in a narrow geographic range that was typically dominated by spruce, conifers, and also deciduous redwoods, which may have made it more vulnerable to extinction because its habitat is obviously much more restricted. And remains of these guys have been found in northern Ohio that may suggest that humans may have interacted with them as well. And both of these, Cervus scotti and a lot of these other large extinct mammals may have been the target of humans. And remains of stag-moose along with short-faced bear bones, peccary bones, and giant beaver bones have been found in Ohio. So in terms of the paleobiology, they're not too different from moose. These guys would have lived in marshes, swamps, and bogs, as well as spruce and taiga communities, things like that. And also suggest live in like woodlands, things like that. And they would have been pretty good to obviously see their ecology, but it seems like they kind of like these habitats. And the change in flora and fauna during that glaciation, when they kind of lost, especially since the Wisconsin and areas like that may have affected living conditions, so it may have made them more vulnerable to true moose coming in. So they actually reproduce more often than a lot of the other mega herbivores. So that's believed, like, why did they go extinct? But it's often been linked to, as I mentioned, the emergence of the true moose that kind of went into America as Beringia kind of let them walk through. And it's very possible they could have spread diseases or just taken over their niche, maybe being a little bit more generalist, taking over these guys' habitat and potentially causing their extinction. But another reason could be competition from other animals such as bison, which moved into the grasslands as kind of the a lot of the spruce habitats, because the grasslands typically need a little bit more water. Kind of all those grasslands kind of moved in as they replaced the forested environments as well. So potentially they just kind of lost their habitat, and the moose coming in didn't really help and got driven to extinction. But the extinction of the Pleistocene megafauna is always going to be something very controversial and talked about a lot, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. So yeah, really, really wonderful mod. I'm a big fan. So next, we've got all our birds coming up. We have got, by also narwhaler, we've got the white-cheeked pintail. So we've got a really cute little duck here. So we'll have a look at them in the water, since they look better in the water. So the white-cheeked pintail, also known as the Bahama pintail or the summer duck. There is a species of dabbling duck that was actually first described by Carl Linnaeus, who invented kind of taxonomy and how it is. And in his landmark 1758 book of Systematica Natura, which is used as actually still has the current scientific name, so it's basically unchanged since it was described. So these guys have a very, very wide habitat. They live all across South America, pretty much. They are found in the Caribbean, South America, and also in the Galapagos. And they typically occur in water that's some salinity. So they typically live in estuaries, mangrove swamps, and brackish lakes and things like that. And with the three subspecies, there's the lesser Bahama pintail, which is kind of the type that lives in the Caribbean and also can be found in Florida as a vagrant. Also, the greater Bahama pintail that lives in maybe partly migratory, so it breeds in Argentina and then winters further north. And also the Galapagos pintail that obviously lives in the Galapagos Islands. So these guys are considered least concern as well. They're obviously quite common. And like many southern ducks, the sexes are quite similar, and they get their name the white-cheeked pintail because they have these white cheeks here, and they've got this little tail that looks like a pen where they get the name pintail. And they also have this red bill that they have going on here that looks really, really cool with a red base. And some birds actually will lack the pink, especially if they're younger. So let's see if we can have a look at the babies here. Little cute little babies, more typical like little baby duck patterns, and they're very hard to confuse with other ducks that live in their range. And in terms of their behavior, these guys would typically feed on aquatic plants and small creatures that are obtained from dabbing and things like that. So they dab into the water and just go boom, and they actually nest on the ground near where under vegetation or near water. And they're actually quite common in aviculture as well, so they're quite popular in wildfowl collections as well. And escapees have been seen to become kind of semi-wild, or populations have kind of established themselves in Europe, with a white variant being known as in aviculture as the silver Bahama pintail. So really, really cool little duck here. Really cool to talk about these guys in the Walla. Really cool to see you doing some, not just mammals, but lots of birds and things. I'm a big fan, big fan. So next, we've got more birds. We're gonna last four. We're kind of gonna go through all these birds. We've got the Sarus crane over here. I know I've talked about these guys before, but these guys have been updated to fit the red crown crane. So these guys are a large non-migratory crane that live around the Indian subcontinent, also Southeast Asia and Australia, so quite a wide range. They're the tallest of the flying birds, and they can stand up to about 1.8 meters or 5 feet 11 inches tall. And they're conspicuous species of across woodlands and wetlands, open wetlands of about South Asia, and woodlands and stuff like that in Australia. So quite wide-ranging, can be found pretty much everywhere. And the main way you can tell them apart from other cranes is that they've got grey colour and the contrast red head that they've got going on here, where they will forage in these marshes where they look for tubers and insects, crustaceans, small vertebrate prey, pretty much anything they get their mouths around. And like other cranes, they will form these kind of long-lasting bonds that will maintain through their lives. And they will perform territorial and courtship displays that include like loud trumpeting, dance-like movements and leaps and stuff like that to talk about that as well. So I think that's really cool. In terms of their weight, I believe they weigh about 8.4 kilograms on average for a large one. And as I mentioned, the distributed range can get between 5 to 12 kilograms, depending on the range and stuff like that. And they can get to a maximum height of about 1.8 feet tall, 1.8 meters tall. So that's huge. It's as tall as a tall person, actually, like just under 6 foot. And and they're also can be quite heavy. The largest bird in Australia, that they tend to be smaller, things like that. As I mentioned, the distribution, they can pretty much live anywhere they live from India to Australia, live in all sorts of just open habitats, kind of woodlands, grasslands, wetlands, places like that. In terms of their ecology, they will make long migrations. Well, other cranes will make long migrations, but these guys don't really do that. So they only fly short distances. They will fly kind of seasonally. Maybe they'll go to different areas, but they won't really truly migrate and do big flying away other places. And as I mentioned, in terms of feeding, they're all omnivorous. They'll feed on plants, insects, frogs, even water snakes, birds and turtles, and along with their eggs, things like that. Just whatever's small enough to get their mouths around, they will eat. And let's carry on here. I just don't want to talk too much about these guys because I've already covered them before. In terms of conservation status, these guys, I believe, are considered vulnerable because there's about 13. There's estimated to be about 20,000 mature Sarus cranes in the wild as of 2009. and the most robust of them, the Indian population, is about fewer than 10,000. So in terms of breeding, these guys kind of, when they breed, they'll make these big nests of about 2 meters, or about, have a look at the adults here, of about 2 meters in diameter and about a meter tall. And the clutch will typically weigh 1 to 2 eggs, or rather 3 to 4 really, that include both sexes, and they will incubate for about 31 days, with the eggs being about 240 grams, and they'll be like this chalky white. And when disturbed, the parents may actually sometimes attempt to conceal the eggs by covering them with the material on the edge of the nest. And the eggshells will obviously be removed when they hatch, and even be swallowed as well. About 30% of all breeding pairs succeed in raising chicks, and most of them will raise 1 to 2 chicks, with brood size of 3 being rare. So the high success, about 60% in Australia. Some places it can change. The high success rate is attributed to the above average rainfall during that year. And the chicks obviously fed for their parents by the first few days, but they're able to feed independently after that and follow their parents around. And young birds will stay with their parents until the next breeding season, and in captivity they will breed only after their 5th year. And they're actually wildly believed to pair for life, but they will divorce, and mate replacement have been recorded in case of one dies, or just they simply just get tired of each other. So sometimes like that. And as I mentioned, they are endangered species, vulnerable. So there's only about 10,000 in India, but there's also globally there's about 20,000. And they're considered sacred in most of their places, like in Pakistan as well. There's some areas that have been extirpated as well. Generally considered sacred where they live, but the big issues, things like irrigation and habitat loss, has been really affecting them, like rice paddies, things like that. And the reason that, because of degradation, also hunting and collecting and pollution in their environments has been another issue. Also competing species and potentially disease has been a big issue for these guys. And there have been some reproduction programs in Thailand to try and bring these populations up, because they've been extirpated from Malaysia and the Philippines, but there have been obviously reintroduction efforts. So that's really, really cool. So yeah, really cool Saurus crane. I'm a big fan of these guys. So let's move on to our next animal here. We've got a little penguin. We've got the little blue penguin. I've already covered these guys, but they got a wonderful remake, and they're something that's local, so I got to cover them. And look how cute they are, especially little babies. So the little blue penguin are the smallest species of blue penguin, of any penguin really. They get on average about 33 centimeters tall, or and about 43 centimeters 17 inches in length, though they can often vary a lot between the subspecies. So on the coastlines of southern Australia, New Zealand, where they live, and also in Chile potentially. In Australia, they're typically called fairy penguins because they're small like fairies. But in New Zealand, they're considered little blue penguins, or just blue penguins, because they are obviously blue. And they're also known by their Māori name, the korora, which is pretty cool. So they may be actually potentially be 2 species, because there's a population that lives in Otago and also Australia that may be a different species, but we won't get a taxonomy of that. And but yeah, they suggest there's like a 2 million year difference between these guys. But like all these penguins, they typically have wings that have developed into flippers like these to allow them to swim around and fly in the water. Let's see if we can find one in the water. Is there one swimming? Oh, not right now. Come on. Are you going to have a swim? Swim for me. Come on, little man. So these guys, as I mentioned, typically grow between 30 and 33 centimeters, or 12 to 13 inches tall, and weigh about 1.5 kilograms, or about 3 pounds. With their upper body being this really bluish and lighter underbelly, so similar counter shading. And these guys also are believed to have quite a long lifespan, so they live on average 6.5 years, but flipper ringing experiments show that they may actually live up to 25 years in captivity, so quite long-lived. So as I mentioned, they have wide distribution. They can be found in the entire coastline of New Zealand, that includes the Chatham Islands, and southern Australia, where they include roughly 20,000 pairs on Barbel Island, with the colonies in Australia existing in New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, Western Australia, and the Jervis Bay Territory. And there's also been some reported in Chile and South Africa, but it's unclear whether they're migrants or a breeding population. But as new colonies have been discovered all the time, the estimated world population is about 350 to 600,000 animals. So, as I mentioned, overall, New Zealand, their populations have been declining because of some colonies being extinct because of introduced predators, also land use changes, which has also been very, very sad because obviously these guys, like a lot of New Zealand birds, they aren't used to the predation of mammals, so they typically don't know how to deal with that. Also, as I mentioned, issues such as climate change and clearing of land where they used to live. So there are areas where there's intensive pest control in New Zealand. These guys tend to bounce back, so it's always good. But Australian little penguin colonies typically exist offshore, where they're protected from terrestrial predators, and they can be found in the Shark Bay, places like that. And foraging penguins have been seen around there, but typically they tend to nest on small offshore islands. Typically New South Wales and Sydney's North Harbour, there's a population there. Some other areas, such as South Australia, Tasmania as well. Tasmania actually has the largest population of little blue penguin that ranges to 110 to 190,000 breeding pairs, which actually less than 5% are found on mainland Tasmania because of dogs and things like that. They also attack them, quolls, devils, things like that. So these guys will typically try and breed on offshore islands or on the mainland when they can, but obviously predators can be an issue. In terms of behavior, they're diurnal, like many species, as they'll come in at night and you can sleep and often incubate the eggs as well. So they kind of go out during the morning, they'll go out and feed and then come back during night. And their range, as I mentioned, they can swim great distances. And actually in 1996, there was a banded penguin that was found dead in Middleton that had been banded in 1991 from South Australia. So it's quite a big distance. And in terms of feeding, why are you swimming? I want to see some swimming. Well, let's have a look at the... they having issues? No, we won't worry then. Let's see. Come on. They just don't want to swim today, it seems. But anyway, we'll just have a look. So, in terms of feeding, these guys will typically feed on small fish, cephalopods, crustaceans, typically whatever they can get their mouths around. And it seems like they have a preference for like anchovy and picard and things like that. But they will also eat things like crab larvae, seahorses, jellyfish, things like that. And actually, in New Zealand, important little penguin prey includes red cod, cinder sprat, arrow squid, and things like that. And they're generally inshore feeders, so they typically won't dive more than 2 meters, and the mean dive is about 21 seconds. And on 1980s, they seem to dive estimated on average 23-24 seconds, with a maximum recorded depth and time submerged for these guys about 90 seconds or about 60 meters. Oh, they're waiting for food. Just them all run and have a look at these little babies. So really, really cute. So now we're going to move on and talk about the reproduction of these little rats. Look at this little man. Look at this little man. So, these guys will reach sexual maturity at different ages. So the females will reach maturity about 2 years old and males about 3 years old. And between June and August, males will return to shore and renovate their burrows and try and find a female, where males will compete for partners with displays and things like that. And typically breeding will happen annually, but the timing and distribution duration of this breeding season will vary a lot between the location and year to year, things like that. And they actually remain faithful to their partners during the breeding season and whilst they hatch eggs. And other times of the year they tend to swap burrows. They also exhibit slight fidelity, so that means they will use the same colonies and festing sites over year. And they can often breed in also isolated pairs and colonies, or it's kind of just generally, it just really depends. In terms of nesting, it varies a lot during that, depending on their habitat. This guy's going for a swim. Let him go for a swim. Really just depends on the habitat. They'll often hang out in like sandy burrows excavated by other birds as well. They'll often even share their burrows with pipe prions and also shearwaters as well, which is really cool. And in terms of their native predators, typically it's not really an issue, but in Australia they've been eaten by tiger snakes and goannas and things like that. Been known to take little blue-tongued lizards have been known to take eggs as well. At sea, these guys are often eaten by seals as well, and other predators can be sharks, Australian sea lions, and barracuda. Barracuda, I believe they say, in Australia. And the introduction of Tasmanian devils to the Australian mainland and Australian island of Marina Island has also led to the complete decimation of the breeding population there, about 3,000 individuals. And they're also preyed upon by white-bellied sea eagles, also like kelp gulls, currawong, specific gulls as well. And even one has been killed by a water rat. But New Zealand, they don't typically have these kind of issues, mainly around Australia. But in New Zealand, there's a lot of introduced predators such as rats, stoats, ferrets, things like that are very, very bad for these guys. So in terms of their relationship with humans, people often love them and put them in zoos. Other times, they've been evolved from direct exploitation. People have been taking their meat, skins, and eggs, but not really as much anymore, it seems. Let's have a look at these little guys swimming over here. But as I mentioned, these guys obviously were exploited, but now they're considered tourism. So lots of people will come out and see them at dusk, like when they come in near the colonies. People really do enjoy seeing them. They're very, very cute. But in terms of their threats, prey availability is a big thing because climate change has been a big issue, reducing the prey. And also molting can be dangerous for them because they can't go and eat food. Dogs and cats are another big issue, especially around New Zealand and Australia. Introduced predators, foxes as well, Tasmanian devils, ferrets and stoats. There's been a big issue in New Zealand. Also human development and interference where people will go and destroy their burrows. Also kind of just go and clear out land that they use for rearing their eggs. They kind of just destroy it and use it for sheep, which can be quite dangerous. Also fishing as well. Oil spills has been very bad. Plastic pollution and climate change has all been big issues. But luckily they are considered doing well. I believe they are least concerned. But a lot of these issues can be very big for species like these. So really just need to take care of them. But luckily there's lots of places that can rescue these seals, penguins. And I've been to a few of these places and it's really cool to see these cute little guys. They're very famous for just being cute little penguins and people love these penguins. So yeah, that was done by the Sarus crane was done by Bongo Hardwood, and Little Blue Penguin was done by Mega Rex Gaming and Leaf. So nice little remaster there. So next, last but most definitely not least, we've got Narwhalo back again, and we have got one of the coolest animals I think that we've had in this game. We've got the Shoebill. So the Shoebill, also known as the whalehead or the whale-headed stork or the Shoebill stork. These guys are a large, very big stork that has derived its name, as you can see, from their shoe-shaped bill. And they have a somewhat stork-like overall morphology, but they've been kind of shown to be in these order kind of storks. But actually, they're actually more closely related with genetic evidence to pelicans and herons in the pelicaniforms. So they're more closely related to penguins and herons than they are to storks, which is very interesting. And you can see the adults typically have this grey, while the baby, as you can see there, are typically more brown. And they live in tropical East Africa in large swamps from South Sudan to Zambia. So in terms of description, these guys can get quite big. They're a tall bird. Their typical height reaches about 100 to 140 centimeters or 43 to 55 inches tall, with some specimens reaching as tall as like 60 inches tall or 152 centimeters. And their length from tail to beak can be 100 to 104 centimeters as well, with a wingspan of about 230 to 260 centimeters or about 7 to 8 feet, with adults typically ranging between 4 to 7 kilograms or about 8 to 15 pounds, with males on average being about 5 kilograms or 12 pounds, with females being about 11 on average, 4.9 kilograms, where they typically, as you can see, they have these grayish markings, but they also have this very, very huge, see the other one talk about here. They've got these very, very huge bills that obviously look like a shoe where they get their name from. And the exposed bill is like, I think about 24 centimeters, and is the third longest bill among extinct birds after pelicans and a lot of these large storks. So they've got quite a large bill. And the main difference is that it's quite wide. And they've also got quite large feet as well. And they're actually well adapted because they've got these long wings and they're actually adapted for soaring. So really, really interesting birds. So in terms of their flight patterns, the wings are held flat when they're soaring. And like the pelican and storks of the genus Leptophilus, these guys will fly with their necks retracted. And they typically will flap around about 150 flaps per minute, which is actually one of the slowest of any birds, as with the exception of larger storks. And they actually have flapping and gliding cycles that actually similar to things like condors and larger storks, which is very interesting. So yeah, really interesting. They've got these really huge bills. I believe you can see the mandible there is about like 25 centimeters or about 10 inches. So they got very, very huge bills. I just want to accentuate how big and cool they look. Just really wonderful birds. So these guys typically live in freshwater swamps around central tropical Africa. So they can be found from southern Sudan and South Sudan through to Congo, Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania, and Zambia. And they're typically most numerous in the West Nile subregion, but they can be found in also places like the central Cameroon, Malawi, the Okavango Basin, Botswana, and places like that. They can be found in places like that. Well, they seem to eat a lot of things such as papyrus and lungfish, so they typically you find a lot of animals in the areas like that. So these guys, in terms of the behavior and ecology, they're noted for their slow movements and tendency to stay still for long periods. They often look like a statue. But they're also quite sensitive to human disturbances and may actually abandon their nest if it's flushed off by humans. But however, while foraging, their dense vegetation stands between it and humans, they can be quite tame. They actually are attracted to poorly oxygenated waters such as swamps, marshes, and bogs, where fish will frequently come up to the surface to breathe. And exceptionally for a bird this large, they often will stand and perch on floating vegetation. That makes them appear somewhat like a giant Goliath heron as well. Very interesting. And they're solitary. They'll forage about 20 meters or so away from one another, even when they're relatively densely populated. And they will actually stalk their prey using tactile hunting, so they'll use their vision. They won't use tactile hunting, so they typically will use their vision to try and look for signs of fish and then grab them when they get a chance. And when they spot it, they'll have a quick, violent strike and then grab it and then pull it up. And handling time after strike can be 10 minutes, just sometimes can be big. And the activity of actually hippos may actually help shoebills sometimes, because they will often force fish to the surface or just make fish more obvious to them. So that's also really, really cool. And these guys are largely piscivorous, so that means they typically eat fish, as they will eat things like lungfish, bichirs, also tilapia and catfish. But they've also been known to eat frogs, water snakes, Nile monitors, and baby crocodiles. Also, turtles, snails, rodents, and small waterfowl have been eaten. And actually, there's been a slightly an unconfirmed report of a shoebill eating young leishway. So that's very, very weird. And given its sharp beak and huge bill, it's actually kind of considered possible, but we really don't know. But the fish in the general size range they'll eat is about 15 to 50 centimeters, or 5 to 19 inches, and weigh about 500 grams, or about a pound. Though lungfish can get as much as 1 meter, and up to things like that. So they typically just feed on whatever they can get their mouths around. They typically eat things associated with water. So in terms of breeding, the solitary nature of their breeding, of their habitat, kind of comes up as well. So they will typically nest at least, there'll be less than 3 nests per square kilometer, unlike lots of herons and things like that. They typically like to keep them themselves. Or they'll make a nest that's about 2 to 4 kilometers, maintain that territory, with the extreme north to south of the range they'll even start to breed right after the rains end. So they typically will both engage in building a nest, both parents, and they'll make a floating platform that'll clear an area about 3 meters, and they can actually be submerged in water as much as 3 meters deep. And the nest itself is about 1 to 1.7 meters, or 3.3 to 5.6 wide. And both the nest and platform are made of aquatic vegetation, with the eggs measuring about 80 to 90 millimeters, and 80 to 90 millimeters high, and about 56 to 71 millimeters long. So about 3 to 3.5 inches high, and 2.2 to 2.4 inches long, and about 640 grams. With incubation typically happening about 30 days, with both parents taking care of the brood until they're big enough to go off and do their own thing. Often food is regurgitated into their mouths from the gullet straight into the babies' mouths as well. And they actually really raise more than one chick, but they will hatch more, and the younger chicks will usually die because they're intended as backups in case the oldest is weak or whatever happens. And fledging happens at about 105 days, and the young birds can fly well at about 112 days. However, they were still fed probably a month or more after this, as you can see. Little guys here, really, really cute. And they will take a young shoebill about 3 years before they become fully sexual mature. And as I mentioned, these guys are mostly silent, but they will perform a bill-chattering display at their nests that's almost like a cow's moo. It's really, really interesting, and it's almost scary. It's just, these shoebills are just really, really wacky animals, which are really, really cool. Let's talk about these guys more a little bit until we end the episode. So, the status is believed to be vulnerable, and the population is estimated to be between 5,800 and 8,000 individuals, with majority living around South Sudan, Uganda, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Zambia, with some populations also being vulnerable. The reason they're considered vulnerable is because of habitat disturbance, also habitat destruction and hunting. And illegal captures have been a big issue for these guys as well, and cultivation for these guys has destroyed their kind of low oxygenated wetland habitats they like to hang out in. And actually, indigenous communities that surround these shoebill habitats will often catch their eggs and chicks and eat them or trade them, so that's another big thing as well. Another issue is also fire, destroying a lot of the habitat that they live in. So these guys, vulnerable, but they're doing okay. There's still a decent amount. And in terms of their relationship to humans, they're actually considered one of the 5 most desirable birds in Africa by bird watchers. And they are docile to humans and do not really show threatening behavior. And they're able to get within 2 meters of a nest once. So they're typically okay as long as you just don't scare them or anything. Yeah, really, really cool birds. I'm a big fan of shoebills. Narwhali, you did a wonderful job with these birds. I'm a big fan. So, yeah, we've got to look at all these wonderful animals today. So I think this would be a great place to end the video. So I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified of anything. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.